Ethan loved one thing more than anything else: his land. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. A wide stretch of fields, tall trees, and a quiet pond that held his best memories. At the edge of that pond was a small dam built years ago by his father to manage the water. To anyone else, it was just stone and steel, but to Ethan, it was a piece of his family's soul. He spent his days fishing by the pond, walking the trails or just sitting in silence, remembering his father's words. Respect the land, and it will always take care of you. Life was peaceful, calm, and steady. Nothing ever changed out there. At least that's what Ethan thought. But peace doesn't last forever. One crisp morning, as the sun hit the water, he heard a low rumble in the distance. At first he thought it was nothing, but then the sound grew louder, closer. His chest tightened as dust rose beyond the trees. These weren't farm trucks. These weren't neighbors. They were construction trucks, and they were rolling past his boundary line like it wasn't even there. Ethan froze, his father's voice echoing in his mind. "Protect what's yours, son." And in that moment, Ethan knew something was very, very wrong. Ethan rushed toward the noise, his boots hitting the dirt faster with every step. And at first, he thought the trucks had taken a wrong turn. But when he broke through the tree line, his heart dropped. This wasn't a mistake. This was an invasion. Bright orange stakes cut through the grass like scars, bulldozers ripped open the ground, and workers in neon vests shouted orders like they owned the place. Then Ethan saw the brand new sign, and his stomach twisted in anger. Future site of Willow Creek Estates, 35 luxury homes. His land, his pond, his father's dam, all stolen without a word. He stormed up to a worker and shouted, "You're on private property! This land isn't for sale." But the man didn't even blink. He just wiped his forehead and said, "Talk to the HOA, buddy. We just follow orders." Before turning away like Ethan didn't even exist, the bulldozer roared louder, chewing deeper into the earth that held his family's history, and Ethan stood there shaking, furious and helpless. That night he pulled out the deed, his name shining back at him, proof that this land was his, proof that his father's legacy was still alive. But the HOA didn't care. They were building as if they already owned it. And Ethan knew one thing for sure. If he wanted the truth, if he wanted justice, he had to face the man behind it all, the president of the HOA. Ethan didn't waste time. With his deed in hand, he marched straight into the HOA office, ready to demand answers. The place looked shiny and polished, with new furniture and fancy artwork on the walls, but the man behind the desk was the real problem. His name was Mr. Grayson, the president of the HOA. He leaned back in his chair with a smug smile, like he'd been expecting Ethan all along. Ethan slammed the papers on the desk and said firmly, "This is my land. You're building on property that doesn't belong to you." For a moment, Grayson didn't even look at the deed. He just chuckled under his breath and shook his head. Then he said the words that made Ethan's blood boil. "You've been sitting on that land for years, doing nothing with it. We're improving it. You should be thanking us." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "That dam, that pond, that land, it's been in my family for generations. You don't get to steal it." Grayson leaned forward, eyes sharp, and smirked. "Steal, no, son? This is progress. These homes are the future. Try to stop us if you think you can." Ethan stood there, heart pounding, staring at the man who had just dismissed his family's legacy like it was worthless. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He walked out of that office, not defeated, but determined. Ethan wasn't the kind of man to back down. So the next morning, he started the fight the right way, with paperwork. He filed complaints with the county, called city officials, and even hired a lawyer to prove the HOA was trespassing. He thought the system would protect him, but that's when he learned just how powerful the HOA really was. Every call led to a delay. Every form led to more forms. And every time his lawyer made progress, the HOA's legal team buried them in fresh counterclaims. Weeks passed, then months. And while Ethan fought through red tape, the HOA kept building. Houses went up fast. Streets were paved. And the sign out front now proudly read, "Willow Creek Estates, now selling. 35 homes, all sitting on land Ethan owned." Worse than that, the HOA was advertising them as exclusive lakeside property. Lakeside, his pond, his dam, his family's land. They were selling pieces of his history like it was nothing but real estate. The frustration burned inside him. The lawyers were stalling, the city was silent, and the HOA thought they had already won. But Ethan wasn't raised to quit. He knew something the HOA didn't. Something about that dam. Something about the land they were bragging about. And if they wanted to ignore him, then maybe it was time to remind them why his father had built it in the first place. The HOA thought Ethan was beaten, but what they didn't know was that his father had left him more than just land. He had left him a secret. That small dam at the edge of the pond wasn't just decoration, it was a gate, a way to control the water flow across the entire property. Ethan knew every bolt, every lever, every turn of the wheel. His father had shown him how to release it safely, and he knew exactly what would happen if it wasn't handled with respect. The homes the HOA had built so quickly sat directly in the floodplain, a detail they had either ignored or chosen not to see. They were too greedy, too focused on money to understand the danger. Ethan walked the property late at night, staring at the glowing windows of the half-finished homes, listening to the laughter of families who had no idea what their houses were built on. His blood boiled, but his mind was sharp. He thought about his father's words. The land will always protect itself, but sometimes it needs a hand. Ethan didn't want destruction. He wanted justice. He wanted the HOA to understand what it meant to disrespect the land and the people who cared for it. And as the day of the grand opening drew near, with banners flying and music ready to celebrate the new neighborhood, Ethan made his choice. The morning of the grand opening was bright and loud. Balloons lined the brand-new streets. Music played from rented speakers, and families gathered with smiles, ready to see their dream homes. The HOA president stood front and center with a giant pair of scissors, grinning like a king about to cut his ribbon. But while they celebrated, Ethan stood alone at the dam. His hands rested on the heavy metal wheel his father once turned, the same wheel that controlled everything. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. His father's voice echoed in his head. "Respect the land, son." But respect worked both ways, and the HOA had shown none. With a deep breath, Ethan leaned his weight into the wheel. At first, only a trickle of water spilled out. Then the trickle grew, rushing into a stream, and then into a roar that thundered down the channels toward Willow Creek Estates. Back at the ceremony, the cheers turned into screams. Water cut through the brand-new pavement, flooding basements, tearing across lawns, and filling streets that weren't meant to exist. People scattered. The HOA leaders panicked, and Mr. Grayson's smile vanished as chaos swept through his precious neighborhood. And from his place at the dam, Ethan just watched. Calm, steady, determined, the land had spoken. The water didn't wipe the neighborhood off the map, but it exposed the truth the HOA had tried to bury. The homes were built on a floodplain, land they never owned, land they had stolen. City officials couldn't look the other way anymore. Investigations opened, lawsuits piled up, and buyers demanded their money back. The HOA's shiny image cracked overnight. Families packed up, construction stopped, and the neighborhood the president bragged about turned into a ghost town. And through it all, Ethan stood firm. He had his deed in one hand, his father's old notebook in the other, and the pond behind him, calm again, as if nothing had ever happened. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He simply honored his father's words. Respect the land, and it will respect you back. Ethan hadn't just defended his property, he had protected his legacy. The HOA thought they could erase him, but in the end, the land erased them.